Welcome to part 3A of the mental meanderings of an aging Christian. This part 3, will focus on my speculations and visions as to where we are going. In so doing, I will attempt to pull together various threads that have formed part 1 and 2 of these presentations. Prior to doing that, on the next slide, I would like to state the rationale for my declarativeness, both with regard to our possible directions around where we're going, and ultimately my faith in that regard. End of slide. This slide is a presentation of various rationale that form the basis of the vision choices I will make in part 3. They are certainly based upon the life experiences of an 80-year-old person. One of the first is the fact that in my being I carry a Christian faith history dating back 1,200 years or more. Why is this important? Because in the latter part of my studies, I came to the conclusion that our DNA contains not only our total genetic history, but the very experiential consciousness history of our genetic evolution. This is based solidly on the perspective that energy and matter are part of the same ultimate reality. I'm a child of 20th century Saskatchewan pioneers. Both sides of my family settled in Saskatchewan, southwestern Saskatchewan, in the first 2 decades of the last century. The vision choices are based upon a lifetime of study in the topics of history, philosophy, theology, comparative religion, social sciences, health, particularly in psychosocial illness and well-being aspects, and in research methodologies. They are also founded upon years of professional practice as a priest, social worker, professor, researcher, and to a limited degree, international development specialist. Finally, they're based upon a personal Christian faith that, while consistent throughout my life, has continued to evolve and deepen in the reconciliation of knowledge from science and faith, as expressed and understood in the continuous unfolding of the tribal stories of the people, including those exemplified in the Christian tradition. End of slide. As I worked on the outline and the graphics for part 3 of these presentations, I came across an essay by Teilhard Desjardins entitled The Christic. It was written barely a month before his death in 1955. Desjardins was born in 1881. His life as an anthropologist and a priest was totally preoccupied with the effort to combine the findings of science with his worldview and faith. Below this life and writings of Teilhard de Chardin, I have simply listed a number of his books and writings. He was a prolific writer. It is strange, though, that his place in Christian thought, particularly Catholic Christian thought, has been rather enigmatic. As his writings began to emerge, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, in reviewing his work, decided that it should not be published under the Catholic banner, and he was urged to refrain from such publication. In addition, it was instructed that his position should not be taught in the seminaries, the institutions of theologic preparations for the priesthood. This position by the Church remained in effect throughout his life. And in fact, history has it that ultimately his friends decided that they would support publication outside of the Catholic contexts. Thus, his place in Catholic Christian thought, while enigmatic, has become rather popular, particularly in the last time following his death. And in America particularly, he has emerged as one of the guiding lights of the American Catholic theological world, and has a rather strong and devoted following. In many ways, some of the underpinnings of this following are very quiet challenges to much of historical Catholic Christian doctrine. His place in my thought and the Where Are We Going visioning also has a fairly lengthy history. I first began to encounter the work of Teilhard de Chardin in the middle 60s as I began practice of the Roman Catholic priesthood. And this fascination with his work continued throughout the years that followed, and has been a matter of particular focus again in the last 15 years. When I came across the Christic and read it as a summary essay of his intellectual life, the way that he framed it and described his thinking came to me to be a very useful background to part 3, and so it will form the skeleton upon which I will try to integrate the previous threads. Desjardins' purpose in the Christic is to summarize his view of a life spent integrating key doctrines from the Christian faith, Catholicism, with the findings of science. From the Christian perspective, perhaps the two most essential elements of Christianity, that of love, divine love, and the commandment to love one another as we are loved, and the resurrection, the outpouring of God's life and its manifestation in the resurrection of Jesus, particularly in its what we will call universal implications. These two doctrinal positions are the core of his integration with the findings and the evolving developments in the scientific world. This slide contains 4 statements made by Desjardins concerning religion and evolution. He states, religion and evolution should neither be confused nor divorced from each other. Religion and evolution are destined to form one single continuous organism in which their respective lives prolong, are dependent upon, and complete one another. Thirdly, people are looking for a religion of humankind and of the earth, which gives meaning to human achievements. And finally, a religion that will kindle cosmic and human evolution and a deep sense of commitment to the earth. End of slide. Desjardins begins the introduction of his essay with the title The Amorization of the Universe. Amour are French and Spanish words for love. And the double perception of which he speaks is really the perceptions of science and religion. In the cosmic conversion, he has summarized the whole Big Bang process that continues now in evolution. But it is really important to note that it is at once physical and psychic. In other words, in the very most primitive expressions of the Big Bang, the psychic or consciousness is an intimate part of the physical, and that together they make up the totality of what is called the stuff of things. But that as evolution progresses, this totality of the stuff of things folds in upon itself, getting greater and greater complexity, and carrying this to the point where that stuff is made to co-reflect itself. We would be seen as that part of the universe that is now capable of the co-reflection. Nestled in the concept of his Christic emergence are the thoughts that begin and perhaps are best expressed at the beginning of St. John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things were made through him. And so the Word, being the Son of God, is that emergence of the divine being into creation itself, but also becoming incarnate in the flesh, in the person of the Christ. A presence that he sees as so intimate that it is universal. It is infusing the totality of nature. And as we will see and have mentioned earlier, this is the concept of divine love infusing the universe. And the Christian resurrection is seen as the physical manifestation of this divine love, but also the emergence into the new creation of the totality of the universe. The convergence and emergence referred to in the previous slide might also be described as the coming of age of revelation and science. In the coming of age of revelation, what we have seen is that in the past several hundred years, there has been and is continuing to take place an emerging understanding and integrating of the mythologies, the stories, and their essential truths as contained and expressed in the ethnicities, the tribal cultures, the religions, the stories, traditions, and rituals of the people of the globe. These stories were usually contained and expressed through the priest, the shaman, the prophets, the priestesses of the various cultures and ethnicities, but also in the cultural traditions and the historical origins of the peoples. At the same time as this understanding and integrating and seeing the essential truths behind or beyond the metaphorical stories, we have seen the coming of age of science, the understanding and integrating of the continuously developing body of knowledge, science-derived essential truths that allows us to combine with the truths described above into one continuous organism in which the respective paths or lives of revelation and science prolong, are dependent upon, and complete one another. It should also be noted that in the coming of age of revelation, very often this has been interpreted as the truths given to us by God in revelations. And in the coming of age of science, we might describe it as the understanding of God and the learning of God through the understanding of creation. But what is now taking place is the fact that with the development of our knowledge, our place in the universe has become one of co-creators. And one needs only to look at the world in which we live, and particularly its development, its human development over the last several hundred thousands of years, to understand that we are now, in one way or another, very highly co-participants in the interactive, creative evolution of the universe. End of slide. This co-creative capacity in human consciousness, described briefly in the previous slide, but also that acknowledges the tremendous development and rapidity of change we are now experiencing, carries with it this deeper realization of what we can call, or what I would call, the divinity in the universe. That the boundless love which resulted in creation to begin with, and the incarnateness of God, both in the Christic idea, the Christ reality in Jesus, but also in our understanding of the role of the Word as described in Scripture, speaks to this reality of God in creation. This slide and a few slides that will follow acknowledge that presence of God. So from Plutonius, we have this quotation: God is not external to anyone, but is present within all things, though they are ignorant that he is so. Next slide. I must say that this slide contains a description that is very dear to me and is perhaps one of my most favorite, since in my own personal life experiences, the realization of this center or this point was profound and significant at one very brief but deeply real period. The quote is from Thomas Merton: "At the center of our being is a point of nothingness, which is untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, which is never at our disposal, from which God disposes our lives, which is inaccessible to the fantasies of our mind or the brutalities of our own will. This little point of nothingness in us, as our poverty is the pure glory of God in us." Next slide. Some further elaborations of the divine spark within from Western history. Heraclitus speaks of the eros, or the hearth. Plato, the inner spark of divine. The Stoics, universal fire. Aristotle, the agent intellect. Plotinus, the one. Three further quotations relating to God within us. Within us we have two lamps, the sevenfold intensified Spirit of God within our spirit. Biblical quotes referencing Proverbs, Book of Revelation, and 1 Corinthians. "I saw the Lord with the eye of my heart, and I said, 'Who are you?' And he said, 'Yourself.' The more we come to the authenticity of self, the more we can come to the authenticity of God." Next slide. Following this brief discussion of God within us and in the universe, let us look at the contrasting philosophical, theological views of God and the God-universe relationship. Basically, three paradigms are outlined. The theistic paradigm, where God and the universe are viewed as separate. This was a prominent version in the 17th, 18th centuries, as referred to in early parts of this work. Pantheism is the view that God and the universe are one, that all is divine, and there is this divine oneness in everything. Panentheism is a view of the universe within God. And I will read from the text of Bruce Sanguin's commentary. "The story of evolution is itself a sacred text. The evolving cosmos and evolutionary history of life on our planet is divine creativity finding its ongoing fulfillment and expression, and we are the occasions of the divine creativity and love coursing through the cosmos. We are called to be the new thing that is eternally springing forth from the heart of God. End of slide. The Judeo-Christian tradition has, at one time or another, tended to espouse each of the above previously described views of God. It is the Christian concept of the Trinity as its explanation of God in everyone and everywhere that it is perhaps best suited by panentheism. Elia Delio, in the book by Davis and Clayton entitled How I Found God in Everyone and Everywhere, states, Bonaventure looked to Dionysius and Richard of St. Victor to understand God as ultimate goodness, marked by a trinity of persons in love. The life of the Trinity originates from the first divine person, the Father, who, as first, is infinitely fecund and fountain fullness, fontalis plenitudo, of goodness. This fountain fullness expresses itself perfectly in one who is Son and Word. This process reaches its consummation in the love between them, which is the Spirit. Love, therefore, is the energizing dynamic life of the Trinity. A logical conclusion? Love, therefore, is the energizing dynamic life of God that infuses the universe. The Gospel of St. John, in its first chapter, contains one of the world's most remarkable descriptions of a view of God and creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. St. Paul, in the letter to the Colossians, reiterates that Christ is the creator and sustainer of all things, stating, For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Next slide. Another slide emphasizing the reincarnational and eternal aspects of the Son of God as manifested in Jesus. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. End of slide. The writings of Francis Xavier Durwell in the book In the Redeeming Christ, and in a second publication entitled The Resurrection. Both writings are devoted to the redemptive acts of Christ's death and resurrection. This phrase from In the Redeeming Christ links the humanity of Jesus, his crucifixion, and his eternal generation in the Father. Durwell states, he is fixed to his death and resurrection, not as in that state that follows the redeeming act. He remains fixed in his redeeming act itself, in the unrepeatable moment of his death and glorification. Having come at the moment of his death to the high point of his movement toward the Father and his gifts of love, he is received at the same moment with the welcome of divine gratification. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And this glorifying embrace is eternal, an action without any sequel. You are my Son. This day I have begotten you, says the Father, as he extends to the soul and then the body of the Savior the glory formerly hidden of the eternal generation of the Son. This is a remarkable phrase, once again linking the eternal begetting of the Son in the heart of the Trinity to the death and resurrection of Jesus, and also linking it to the role of the resurrection in the unfolding of the universe, as in him and through him all things were made. It is from this act in time, but also an act in eternity, one that links itself also to the view of time and space as part of creation, but outside of time and space and outside of creation, one deals with what we call eternity. End of slide. In my faith, it is my belief that this phrase of the Father, you are my Son, this day I have begotten you, applies not only to Christ in the moment of his commending his Spirit to the Father, it applies to each of us in our acknowledgement of our relationship to creation and our personalized expression of the love of God in creation. The earlier referred to point of God that is deep within us is that gift of this day having been begotten by the Father. Not only that, we are now inextricably linked to that creative act and to what we will see in succeeding slides as the evolution of the new creation, the part we have in our tiny planet, in whatever the fate of the planet and its inhabitants are. We are now co-creators. The life of the planet in its conscious decisions about its directions for the future. Having very quickly stated the importance of the concept of the Trinitarian God viewed as creator of the universe, we now transition to look at Christian scriptures as expressive of underlying visions of where we are going. This slide depicts Christ in his resurrection. On the left and on the right, the megatrends changes in the way that we are living and working today, and the way that we anticipate not only in the near future, but leading to the many centuries of future we look forward to. This statement from the book of Revelation is in some ways an excellent summation of the who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going questions. It brings together science, evolution, the cosmic realities, and the vision of the future. It states, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I heard a loud voice saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.'" The book of Revelation is a very prophetic book, and in some ways needs to be perhaps carefully interpreted. Nevertheless, the enormous development of the world and the contribution that humans have made to that development and the world in which we now live, where, for example, the predictions of dire poverty are now within our grasp within the next 20 years. The reality of change, the mobility of people, the rapid expansion of knowledge, the development of technologies that in fact are bringing about discussion of possible immortality. All of these radical, almost miraculous changes can be seen as depicting the development toward the new heaven and the new earth that we have been essentially co-creators of. To some, and I would ascribe to this, the vision of where we are going is deeply written into this new heaven and this new earth. New slide, please. As a concluding summary, it seems extremely important to me to make three definitive statements. Although the first statement has been rarely discussed in this project. It is critically important to ascribe these to creation itself and to the human experience and to the realities that simply exist within the universe as distinguished from some type of mysterious, dark, devil-sponsored evils. Issues in pain, suffering, death, injustice, evil, immorality, sin, crime are an integral part of the creation human experience and need to be always regarded and treated as such. The possibility of human immorality, human evil, lie in the depths of human freedom. It is we who choose between good and evil, between right and wrong. The second definitive statement is that the evolution of planetary consciousness now demands a correlative evolution in our values, our ethical systems, and our consequent human morality. A review of human history demonstrates that this, in fact, is what takes place. The criticalness of the times within which we live and the serious ethical dilemmas that confront us demands this correlative evolution in values, ethics, and human morality. Number 3, the origins of the universe are nested in the divine abundance, in the abundance of divine love, life, energy. Love, justice, and the rule of law are absolute essentials in human survival. And it is from the basic principles of love, the virtue of charity, and the rule of law as applied in justice and derived from human reason and consensus that form the basis of the possibility of human survival. End of slide. This slide and the next slide provide my conclusions to this project of who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going. Here are some, perhaps, extreme, I believe, statements. I believe that the universe is a bursting forth of divine love. That energy, matter, are manifestations of the same underlying reality. That the energy we call life is an aspect of divine life that extends from the simplest cell to the highest forms of human consciousness. This love life is the new commandment, the capacity to love as we are loved. I believe that our greatest gift to date from this continuously evolving universe is consciousness, awareness, as expressed in intellect, to know and to think, and free will, to act, and ultimately to love. I believe that humans and or their successors now have co-creative roles in the continuing evolutionary processes. I believe that such roles constitute, among other things, our purpose and fulfillment in life, such that the whole universe conspires to fulfill our dreams. I believe that a major life task is thus to learn to recognize and cooperate with the conspiracy and our relationship to it. This is the closest I might come to the serious issue of human free will and divine determinism. I believe we live on the constantly unfolding edge that is creating the new heaven and the new earth. I believe that we are an integral, especially precious part of that universe, that has had its alpha beginnings and will ultimately preserve us in its omega, its endings. End of slide. I will now give a few speculations on the theme of where we are going. To me, it would seem the ever-expanding known universe is ours to populate. The possibility of other life forms and intelligences appears strong. Transhumans, cyborgs, and broad variations in types of humans appears to be possible. Virtual immortality lies on the horizon of scientific possibility. Singularity, as earlier defined, appears possible with serious accompanying ethical considerations that need to be met. If nature and the universe is continually in evolution, so also is the natural law. If change is now exponential, expanding with increasing rapidity, it will continue. Without great care and broad human consensus and action, we are certainly capable of our own destruction. Humanity may simply be another species in the long unfolding processes of the universe. Finally, you might wish to name some of your own speculations. As stated in an earlier part of this project, I'd like to quote W.O. Mitchell in his reference to when do you finish a book. It never ends. One just decides to stop. I have stopped. Next slide, please. A final slide that perhaps in a small way summarizes the eternal mystery of it all. I am who am, the Alpha and the Omega, the path stretching through time and space that is at once the eternal now.